question's from Velvet Spo. Witty, what do you think of the foiling in Mocca 60 being added to the ocean race?
I think it's a good idea. Head of development and the speed of the boats and the ability to be able to design in your own boat is probably what the race has been about for most of it before the Volvo 65. So I would certainly lean that way. And they're also a lot quicker, so you get there a lot quicker.
And which do you prefer, the Volvo 65 or the foiling 60, and why?
Witty will answer that question soon. This is the World on Water for May 1, 2020. In the last 7 days, David Witt from Sun Hon Kai Scallywag answers a few questions regarding the ocean race. Sailing has many high-profile quality sailors and adventurers, and Skip Novak is one of the leaders. Quantum Sail's Vittorio explains the square-top double-sided mainsail on the America's Cup boats on Luna Rossa. The World Match Racing Championship is returning this year when everything gets back to normal, and we look back over the years and Phil Robertson. Finally, back to the ocean race, and we talk to Yaonn Richomme. Now, here's Witty.
This question's from EJ Van Hooselt. They'd like to know, where's the VOR 65 now?
The VO65, the Scallywag one, we handed the keys back like you do for every good car rental in the Hague when we finished. All those boats are owned by the ocean race, so I believe that they've sold them with the option to buy them back for potential teams for the next race, and I believe our one is with the Mexican team sitting in Mexico.
This question's from Velvet Spo. Witty, what do you think of the foiling in Mocca 60 being added to the ocean race?
I think it's a good idea. Head of development and the speed of the boats and the ability to be able to design in your own boat is probably what the race has been about for most of it before the Volvo 65. So I would certainly lean that way. And they're also a lot quicker, so you get there a lot quicker.
And which do you prefer, the Volvo 65 or the foiling 60, and why?
100% the Mocca 60. I have sailed them a bit, simply because the Volvo 65s are just too wet. Can't get out of the weather. The way they're building the Mocca 60 now is the crew are all, because they're semi-foiling, the crew are all around the mast, undercover, out of the weather. Those Volvo 65s is like going around the world with a fire hydrant in your face all day, every day.
So Joe Waters would like to know, will ocean boats ever be fully foiling?
Well, it depends on what your definition of fully foiling is, I suppose, but they sort of already are. The 100-foot trimarans are already foiling. The trimarans, our 60 tri's now foiling. Maserati foils. I think there's another Mod 70 that's foiling. So there's already ocean racing boats foiling. I don't think you compare it to the way the F50 foils. I mean, their offshore's a lot different, but basically we're still up off out of the water and just getting rid of the wetted surface drag. So I think it's inevitable that most fast ocean races will be foiling. I know Andrew Buckland in Australia's designed a 50-footer monohull for the Hobart race to fully foil. But we're a long way from foiling tacking and foiling jibing or anything like that. There's too many safety regulations with the offshore racing and you know, stability rules are going to make it very difficult for that. But I think in the next 5 years you'll probably see at least about 20% of the fleet foiling, I would suspect.
And what's better, one hull or three?
Depends on what the purpose is. I think I want to retire with two on a catamaran. The trimaran's probably as close to sailing an 18-footer as you can get, with a bigger safety factor, as in it's not as twitchy, but a whole lot more trouble because it's offshore and you go upside down. It's a disaster. So your heart's in your mouth a bit with a try. So I think I would probably say try. 3 hulls is better than 1.
Well, welcome to the 4th volume of the Royal Ocean Racing Club's Time Over Distance series. And today we are with Skip Novak. Skip has competed in 4 editions of the Whitbread Round the World race, 3 as skipper with Alaska Eagle, Drum and Fazizi. Since 1987, Skip has spent every season in Antarctic waters, and he's a world authority on polar sailing, as well as being a modern-day Indiana Jones. Skip joins us from Cape Town, South Africa. Welcome, Skip. How's it in Cape Town?
G'day, Louis. How you doing, mate? Yeah, well, let's put it this way. I'm doing a lot more housework than I used to do, and tending a veggie garden as well. And we got quite a strict lockdown going on here, not like you guys in the UK. We're not allowed out of the house except for food and pharmacy, no exercise, no dog walking, not much of anything. But yeah, we survive. Well, I was from the Chicago suburbs, but luckily my dad was a member of the Chicago Yacht Club, and we had a succession of boats down at Belmont Harbor on the north side, and I basically grew up around the harbor and spent all my free time there. That's a picture of me in the sailing school at the Chicago Yacht Club in Belmont there.
Okay.
Age 9, and learned to sail on the lake. Basically, I was a freshwater pirate from a very early age. And the big event of the year there is the Mackinac race from Chicago up to Mackinac Island, 330 nautical miles. Doesn't seem like a lot for us deep watermen now, but back then it was a huge thing. I think I did my first one at the age of 13. That picture there is on a 40-footer called Ingen with a bunch of old boys. I was 14.
Okay. And as a kid at 14, you look totally into it in that picture in the Mackinac race. You obviously were. Did you have any idea what you were going to do?
Well, going back to my sailing history, I've done my share of around the buoys races, and I certainly did that in Chicago, in front of the lakefront. But we also had, these distance races to little towns up and along the Michigan and the Wisconsin shore. And those are the ones I used to love. Sailing as a kid, sailing 30 miles from Chicago to a place like Michigan City, Indiana, was a huge adventure. And then you'd spend the night there and get into all sorts of hijinks on shore with your mates. We had a gang of kids called the Harbor Rats back then. Okay. And then you'd sail back the next day on the Sunday. And for me, it was the voyaging part, which was really the attraction right from the beginning, sailing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, wonderful. Yeah. So we're going to take on to the next slide, which has got a few pictures on it. And I'm going to give you the leading question. So how does a kid from Chicago get to become a navigator in the 77 Whitbread on King's Legend, one of the fastest boats in the world in 77? How did that come about?
Well, first you have to get to Europe, and I sort of struggled getting through university. I started out in the cornfields of Illinois, and that was pretty boring, and sort of flunked out in a few schools, and eventually went down to Florida, where I planted my flag in Clearwater and worked in a boatyard there called Courtney Ross Service, quite a famous yard back in the 70s, and that was a yard where they were always preparing the boats for the Southern Ocean Racing Conference, the SORC. And, I worked in the yard as a rigger and a fitter and managed to get through school at University of Tampa. And when that ended, I think I was 23 then, I took a year off and bummed around the States doing all the races up and down the East Coast. And eventually got to deliver a German Admiral's Cup boat for Willy Erbrook, Pinta. Yeah. We did the Onion Patch Series, Bermuda race, and then I took it across as skipper to France for him. And then as soon as I handed it over back to Willie, I went right up to Cowes. That was 1976, the year of the big drought. and straight to Cowes Isle of Wight. I wound up getting on Bumblebee 3 for Cowes Week, because I knew all these Aussie characters, from Florida in the day.
Right.
And did all of Cowes Week on Bumblebee 3, and one thing led to the other. And one of those things was having a beer in the Fountain Hotel, and I ran into this Aussie, a Finnish Aussie called Hans Savamäki. We call him Blowy for short. And he says, yeah, I'm going to do a round-the-world race. I'm taking care of the Swan 65 King's Legend, and we need a navigator. Can you navigate? And I said, yeah, I can do a bit of that. I've been doing Celestial for, some years already. And basically he says, yeah, you can meet the owner next week. And well, long story short, I signed on, basically sight unseen. And I think back then in the UK, being an American, hanging around habitually, not just for Cowes Week, but sort of, living there. I moved over to the UK, never went home ostensibly.
Right.
There was something special about being an American in the UK, and they thought I was some sort of an expert or whatever. One thing led to the other. So, that was the beginning. Very unlike it is today.
And you were like 25 the start of that race, and you had a tremendous battle with Flyer 2, didn't you?
Yeah, that was our rival. We were rated the same. I think it was 48.6 in the IOR. We had a great crew. I got a lot of my American buddies. That one picture on the lower right there is quite a few American sailors. And they had a great crew. We both had good boats. And one thing we didn't have was a budget, which Connie did have. And he knew how to spend it very wisely. And in the end, we struggled around the world, but the reason we didn't win it was totally my fault. On leg 3, I was the navigator, and we went too far south in the Southern Ocean, and he was 1 degree north, and he was running while we were beating, and that was really the end of the story. And I think we was a day and a half ahead into Rio. Yeah. But we beat him on 2 legs, and he beat us on 2 legs. So if you're looking at the point system as they do now, well, yeah,
You'd have been right in there.
Yeah.
And a lovely little story you told me about how you got the weather in those days as navigator. We can see you there using a sextant, but you did get some weather information from off the boat. Just tell us how that came about.
Well, in those days, we actually had a radio operator, John Roberts, who was sort of dedicated to that, and I helped him out. But you had to take Morse code, and we learned Morse code. Well, I learned it in Boy Scouts way back. And we had a tape recorder where we took the Morse at normal speed and then slowed it down so we could actually read it. And all those dots and dashes were transmitted into drawing a map, a weather map, on a sheet of paper. Isobars, pressure centers, and fronts. And this took hours of work to get a weather map. And of course, weather maps in those days was an art form anyway. And by the time you did all this work, the weather had passed you up. And so it was all sort of a fruitless exercise. And plus the boats were so slow back then compared to they are now. You were at the mercy of the weather. The weather overtook you. You didn't get on top of a front and ride it for days on end like they do now.
Yeah. And I've got to mention, obviously, you were skipper of Alaska Eagle. That was the first time you skippered a boat in the Whitbread, and that was the original flyer. Was that right?
Yeah, that was the original flyer, and bought by an American, Neil Burt from California. And before I became involved, they contracted with Sparkman and Stevens, the original designer, and modified it to try to make it faster. Changed it from a ketch into a sloop, changed the ass end of the boat, rudder, quite a few modifications, and basically it went up 4 feet of rating. And compared to the other Swan 65 and the 81-82 Ray's Zargo, we were struggling to beat them. The boat was certainly no faster, and you imagine this, all those boats were like, apples, pears, and, oranges. They all looked different. They were all different. They all rated different. Nothing to do with one design or box rule, anything. And of course, you don't know what's going to happen until you start the race, because nobody had time to really test themselves and do any racing against these boats. So by the time you got to the Canaries, you were pretty certain you were sailing a dog. And then you had the whole around the world race ahead of you. So, psychologically, it was pretty tough to get to the finish, I have to say.
Luna Rossa is C75 square top. There is a series of images showing Luna Rossa base in Cagliari. where you can see at the very end, more or less, also a close-up image of the top of the double skin mainsail they are using. Probably it is a quite recent version, because you can see there is a very clean finishing of the upper part of the mainsail. As we know, there is a D-shaped mast which is featuring on the edges of the D two tracks for the double skin mainsail, and so this means that as we see a completely smooth surface of the skin we can see, this means that all the systems that are supposed to open and close the upper part of the sail, so to twist exactly as the mainsail trimmer wants, these kind of controls are hidden completely between the two skins. So in these 30-35 centimeters that we have between one skin and the other. So what we can see is like a triangle that is going from the mast and at some point dying, as we can see at some point of these two buttons, most probably, which is supposed to open close to probably modify the aero profile of the very top of the mainsail, which is allowing to change the shape of the main for light and strong winds, or from the taking off mode to the flying mode. And then also this system has to allow from some sliding of the two skins, because obviously the inner aero profile is longer at the leech than the outer aero profile. So the outer skin is normally shorter than the inner skin at leech. So they need to slide one on each other in some way. What we can see is that we have a really integrated system in Luna Rossa, and probably also the other AC-75 has something very similar. But for sure we can say this kind of double skin mainsail can be used in a very good way also for some other more normal boats, probably mega yachts in the first times, but for sure this can be used effectively. The possibility of twisting in a very quick manner the mainsail can be a very good tool to use a square top like this one. We don't see obviously any diagonal button. As you know, every square top is normally made so the very top of the mainsail is kept with the right tension on the leech via a button that is going from the angle of the sail to a point lower along the mast. This is a normal way to keep up a square top. In this case, obviously, is the system itself which is allowing the very top buttons to stay horizontal and to keep the right tension on the leech. So there is no need for the classic square top button. There is no need for this one. But also the system is probably located in the mast, so the cables driving commands to the system are inside the mast, and this kind of movement is just engaged by the double skin mainsail when it is hoisted, like with a normal lock system. So probably this can move, this along the mast can move by itself, can go in this way and can move also sideways to change the profile. But at some point the double skin mainsails, they are engaging it and locking on this system. So in this very clean way you don't have anything running inside the skins of the mainsail, and you have a very clean finishing. As you see, there is just a small part, aerodynamic part, the only black part that you can see outside. Apart from this, everything is hidden inside the system. So compliments Luna Rossa, very good way of solving this. We don't know how it works exactly, but for sure the the final result is fantastic. Ciao, have a good day.
I'll just take you through the roles on the boat that each crew member plays. The first one is my role as the helmsman of the boat, and basically I just stand at the back with the wheel, steering the boat wherever it needs to go and putting it in the right position. I guess my main role is just to make sure the boat's going fast all the time, as fast as it can be, and just telling the crew what I want to do and where we're going, basically from the start. Next role is the main sheet. He looks after the mainsail, which is the biggest sail on the boat, hence the name Mainsail. And his role, he basically sits here, plays the main sheet here, on and off, pulling it on and off to speed the boat up or slow it down, or to go upwind or downwind as well. He also has a traveller, which is like a fine tune to that, so he can tweak it all the way along. His role as well is generally to be the tactician and let the helmsman or the skipper know which way he thinks is the best way to go up the course. Next role is the trimmer. He takes charge of the winches and winding on. Basically get a winch handle in there, and you start winding it on with the jib sheets on there. So his role is to trim the sails, the two front sails, on and off. Same principle, same theory as the mainsail trimmer. And yeah, this is kind of his area. The next area is the pitman. He, or the keyboard, some people say. Basically, he's got all these jammers here, and these are all the halyards. So the mainsail going up and down, the jib going up and down, and the spinnaker going up and down. He controls all the lines here. He pulls the pole up and down as well, and that's I guess that's his role on the boat. The final role is the bowman. Now from here forward is his area, and he gets a bit cranky if someone else gets up there and messes around with it, but it usually goes wrong. His role, he plays with the pole here. So his objective is to get the pole up when you get to the top mark, hoist the spinnaker, so he's pulling away like mad on the mast here with the ropes to get the spinnaker up, and then he'll run forward and pull the jib down, which is your big sail that goes upwind. And once that's up and the spinnaker's up and the jib's down, he then controls the pole from side to side, depending on what jibe you're on. And then at the end of it, when you come to the bottom mark, he'll open up this hatch, jump down it, and then pull the spinnaker into it once the jib's gone up. So that's his role, and that's about it for everyone on the boat.
Robertson calling in the bow. He's on starboard, they're bow down, they're looking at that top mark. Can Canfield cross? They've got him lined up, he's on starboard, Canfield tacking in front. Robertson diving inside, underneath Canfield, and he has crashed hard into the side of Robertson. Massive contact, went for the duck. Canfield tacking right in the way of Robertson there.
That is a huge T-bone. I don't see the damage on board.
It's a blue penalty, so penalty on Robertson.
Well, Yaonn Richomme is the skipper of the Mercury Foundation's team for the next edition of the race, Racing for the Planet. Now, how does somebody that's never done the race before land the role of skipper in their first entry? Well, you only need to look at the results of the Solitaire de Figaro, the incredibly ruthless solo offshore race, the French proving ground for future ocean race stars. And Yaonn has won this race twice, and that's a very rare thing indeed. Mix into that some experience with the IMOCA 60s, a win in the Rue de Rhum in the class 40, and you begin to understand why this person has been labelled as a potential major star of offshore sailing in the future, if indeed he isn't already. So, Yaonn, I mean, obviously you've done some pretty big things. You've got the knowledge, you've got the skills to make a big impact, but the next thing is, considering all the successes you've had before, they've mainly been solo, they've mainly been short-handed sailing. So I guess you've got to build a team. How do you go about expanding your sort of performance from a 1-2 person operation to a large team, like something that would be required for the ocean race?
Well, yeah, for sure. It's the question I get all the time. People think I only sail solo. Well, I think I've actually done most of my racing crew. You know about it because we race together. And so, back in the days of uni, between 2003 and 2006, We had a student team running on the Tour of Var, a very big race at the time. And that's how I got into racing, first of all. And so I got into racing through crew sailing, which is the one I always preferred. But the thing is, in France, if you want to have a professional career in sailing, you need to go through the solo route, you know. And so at the beginning, I told myself that I needed to do the solitaire once in my life to, you know, have no regrets and to give it a try. It kind of went well, and I kept on going. I kept on going. Well, the first few years weren't as good as the last ones, huh? But I kind of kept on going that way. But I've done obviously solo sailing for the past 10 years now.
Yeah.
But I've always liked and actually preferred crewed sailing. You know, they're both very good. They both have their challenges. And obviously, this is a really big challenge for me, is going back into the hardest crew race there is. So I need to get back into selecting people, which was what we were doing before everything started to lock down. But yeah, the challenge is huge, and I think that I can I can concentrate on that for the next year and a half, which is good, and knowing that I've got the knowledge to do the rest of the sailing, and that I already have a few people I want to take with me who have the same culture, and as well that Franck Camas and Charles Caudrelier have proven that what we do in France can be useful on a crewed international race. So I'm not too worried about the knowledge we have. The challenge is definitely building the team.